I still remember the moment my world shifted. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. But it cut through me like nothing else ever had. I was sitting at my kitchen table when I opened the message that said, in the simplest words, that I was not expected at my own daughter's wedding. No explanation, no kindness, just a cold confirmation that the celebration of her future life did not have space for me. For a long time, I just stared at the screen. My hands rested on the wooden table I'd had for years, the one where she had once done her homework, and I felt the air in the room grow heavier. I thought my heart would shatter right then. I could almost hear it, a dull, breaking sound inside me. At first, I wondered if I had misread it, if maybe there had been some mistake. But no, the words were clear. My daughter. The little girl I raised through scraped knees and late-night fevers, the one I sat beside through every heartbreak, had chosen to start the most important chapter of her life without me. The shock didn't come in a rush. It seeped slowly, like cold water rising around my feet, making my chest tighten. I kept asking myself why. Was I too old, too plain? Too much of an embarrassment for her new circle of friends? I replayed years of memories in my head, searching for the moment I had stopped being her mother and started becoming inconvenient. I sat there in quiet disbelief, running my fingers along the edge of the table, trying to ground myself. My body felt heavy, as if gravity had doubled, yet my mind was spinning. I wanted to cry, to scream, to demand answers, but nothing came, only silence. A silence so thick it rang in my ears louder than any noise could. There is a unique kind of heartbreak in being pushed aside by your own child. It is not just rejection, it feels like a denial of your very existence. I could feel my cheeks burning, as if the whole world had seen what she had written, even though I was alone in that small kitchen. My heart ached with a mixture of sorrow and shame, like I had failed in some unspoken test of motherhood. And yet, beneath the raw sting, another feeling crept in. A quiet, unsettling realization that this wasn't just about a wedding. It was about respect that had been slowly slipping away, unnoticed, until now it had vanished altogether. As I sat in that heavy silence, my eyes drifted to a framed photo on the counter. My daughter was just a child in that picture, grinning, her arms wrapped around my neck as if she never wanted to let go. I felt the tears pressing at the corners of my eyes, not just for the wedding I was excluded from, but for the bond that had once been unbreakable. That photo pulled me back through years of memories, birthday cakes baked from scratch, school plays where I clapped the loudest, nights when I stayed awake just to make sure she was breathing when she was sick. Memories that now pressed against me, aching to be remembered. And that's where my mind wandered, even in the midst of betrayal, to the past, to all the times when love felt certain, before I ever imagined it could be discarded. The days after that message felt heavier than I could put into words. My home, once filled with the sounds of family, seemed unbearably quiet. I would walk from room to room and feel the echo of memories pressing in on me. Every corner carried a reminder of my daughter, her laughter bouncing down the hallway, the way she used to leave her shoes by the front door, even the faint trace of her perfume that seemed to linger in her old bedroom long after she had moved out. My life had grown simple over the years, and I had made peace with that. Mornings started with coffee by the window, afternoons with small chores, evenings with a book. But now, those routines only underscored my isolation. It wasn't just about missing a wedding invitation. It was about realizing that the child I had poured my whole life into had closed the door on me. I found myself drawn to a quilt I had made years ago. Piece by piece, I had stitched it together from scraps of fabric collected during her childhood. The pink dress she wore to her first recital, the faded jeans she had practically lived in during high school, even the corner of a pillowcase she once refused to part with. Each square told a story. Each stitch carried my love. That quilt had been my way of holding on to her when time was moving too fast. And now, as I spread it across my lap, it felt like I was holding onto a ghost. I thought about the nights I stayed awake sewing it, my eyes tired, but my hands steady, determined to finish it in time for her to take to college. She had smiled when I gave it to her, but I remember how quickly it was folded and tucked away, forgotten among her new life. It had meant everything to me, and almost nothing to her. That realization ached in a way deeper than words. The contrast was unbearable memories of joy and warmth now clashing with the cold truth of exclusion. I had built my world around her, and she had built hers without me. That knowledge pressed down on me, heavy and suffocating. And yet, somewhere deep inside that grief, a small spark flickered. Maybe it was the quilt itself, a reminder of the strength and patience it took to create something beautiful from broken pieces. Maybe it was the quiet voice inside me whispering that if I could survive this heartbreak, I could survive anything. For a while, I let myself sink into the heaviness. The quilt lay across my lap like an anchor, and the silence of the house pressed against me. But one morning, as the sun filtered through the blinds and painted stripes of light across my living room floor, I felt something stir inside me. Grief had kept me still, but life was still moving, and I realized I couldn't keep sitting in the wreckage of what I had lost. I pulled out a box of old folders, papers I had put off sorting for years. Birth certificates, insurance policies, retirement statements, all of it stacked in uneven piles. At first, my hands trembled as I flipped through them. These were the pieces of a life I had built, the things I had managed quietly while raising a child who no longer seemed to need me. The sadness was still there, but this time it was accompanied by a sense of resolve. I began organizing everything, file by file. I created order out of the chaos. I made notes, highlighted details, and started to see not just what I had lost, but what I still had. The act was small, almost mundane, but it gave me a sense of control that grief had stolen. For the first time since the message, I wasn't just reacting. I was preparing. I thought about survival, about how many times life had knocked me down before losing my parents, saying goodbye to friends, struggling through bills when every dollar mattered. I had survived all of that, and as painful as this betrayal was, I knew I could survive this too. Somewhere between the stacks of papers and the neat rows of folders, my tears stopped falling. My shoulders straightened. A quiet determination replaced the ache. I wasn't going to let my story end with exclusion and heartbreak, because deep down, I sensed there was more to uncover, truths that had been hidden from me. Choices my daughter had made long before that message arrived. And I was ready, finally, to face them. As I organized the folders and stacks of paper, I began noticing small things that didn't sit right. A bill I didn't remember authorizing. A statement addressed to both me and my daughter, though I had never added her name. At first, I brushed it off as oversight clerical errors. Perhaps. But the more I sifted, the more patterns emerged. There was the credit card account where she had once been an authorized user for emergencies. I had agreed years ago, thinking it was a simple way to help if she needed gas money or groceries when her own paycheck was thin. But now, I saw the charges stretching far beyond anything resembling necessity. Designer boutiques, spa packages, dinners at restaurants I had never stepped foot in. Some of these went back years. Then I found insurance paperwork with her handwriting scribbled in the margins, notes that seemed less about my well-being and more about what would eventually be hers. The realization sank like ice in my chest. This wasn't a sudden betrayal. It had been growing, quietly, like a vine wrapping tighter around me until I couldn't breathe. I remembered moments that had once seemed harmless, times when she brushed off my opinions about the house, when she encouraged me to downsize, when she offered to help with finances, but always in ways that made me less visible, less essential. I had mistaken it for care, for her wanting to ease my burden. But looking at the evidence in front of me, it was clear. It hadn't been kindness. It had been calculation. The pain of that realization stung sharper than the wedding exclusion. It meant that my erasure had been deliberate, not sudden. Piece by piece, she had been preparing a life where I was a shadow, useful only until I wasn't. Anger rose inside me, not loud, not reckless, but steady and hot, like a fire catching in dry grass. I thought of all the years I had sacrificed, all the nights I worked late or went without so she could have more. And now, she was rewriting my story to make it seem as if I had never mattered. But as much as it hurt, there was something empowering in the clarity. I could finally see the truth. She had underestimated me, mistaking silence for weakness, trust for ignorance. She thought I would never notice, never push back. That was her mistake, because now I knew, and now I would act. Once the truth had settled into my bones, I knew I could not afford to remain passive. My daughter had been chiseling away at my life for years, and if I didn't act now, she would succeed in erasing me completely. But instead of rage or loud confrontation, I chose silence. Silence, I realized, could be sharper than any argument. The first thing I did was make an appointment with an attorney, not the one my daughter knew, but a woman recommended by an old friend who had built her reputation on protecting people like me. Sitting across from her in that quiet office, I laid out everything I had uncovered. She listened carefully, her pen gliding across the page as I spoke. When I was done, she leaned forward and told me plainly that I had far more power than I realized. And in that moment, I felt the first real surge of strength return. Together, we began redrawing the map of my future. I updated my will, making it clear that my daughter would no longer be the automatic heir she assumed she was. Instead, I set up a trust that redirected my assets to causes that mattered to me: scholarships for young women, community programs for single mothers, and a portion reserved for people who had no family to depend on. For the first time, I felt that my life's work would outlive me in ways that truly honored my values. Next came the practical details. I closed accounts she had once accessed. I secured passwords, added protections, and placed everything under legal safeguards she couldn't touch. It was meticulous work, tedious at times, but every step felt like reclaiming a piece of myself she had tried to take. I even began making plans for my own independence, smaller, but deliberate choices. I looked at moving into a place I chose for myself, somewhere that reflected my taste and needs rather than the ghost of a family life she had already abandoned. The idea no longer scared me. It gave me a sense of freedom I hadn't expected at my age. Through it all, I said nothing to her. I let her believe she was still in control, still one step ahead. I didn't correct her when she made smug comments about the future. I didn't argue when she assumed certain accounts or assets would be hers. Let her think she was winning. Meanwhile, I was weaving a safety net strong enough to catch me and sharp enough to cut her illusions to pieces. Each night, as I tucked the quilt around my legs, I felt calmer. What had once symbolized my grief now became a reminder of endurance. Just as I had stitched it from scraps, I was stitching together a new life, one that no one could take from me. The satisfaction didn't come in dramatic bursts. It was slow and steady, a quiet triumph that grew with every signed document, every sealed folder, every plan put into place. My revenge was not about shouting or punishing. It was about reclaiming the dignity she had tried to strip away. And as those pieces fell into place, I could sense it. Justice was not only possible, it was coming. The day the consequences began to surface, I felt an odd calm. For weeks, I had been preparing in silence, making choices behind closed doors while my daughter carried on with her life as though I were no longer part of it. She believed she had already won. But life has a way of revealing the truth when arrogance blinds someone to reality. It started with the bank. She had grown used to using accounts she assumed were hers to manage, swiping cards with the confidence of someone entitled to more than she had earned. When those accounts were suddenly closed, when her access was denied, she called in confusion. But I stayed silent. I didn't need to explain. I had already secured everything under my own name, with protections she could not bypass. Then came the social unraveling. Word travels quickly in small communities, and whispers spread when people noticed her lifestyle no longer matched her means. She had built an identity around status designer clothes, luxury dinners, vacations that looked perfect on social media. But without the resources she had quietly siphoned, the mask began to slip. Friends grew distant. Invitations stopped arriving. It's amazing how quickly people scatter when the shine wears off. I watched it all unfold without gloating. It wasn't joy I felt, but a steady sense of justice, a balancing of scales that had been tipping for far too long. The deeper blow came when her reputation began to crumble at work. She had once spoken about how proud her colleagues were of her success, how she was seen as someone reliable and responsible. But in truth, she had leaned on my support more than she admitted. Without access to what she thought would be her safety net, cracks in her image appeared, missed deadlines, financial missteps, an edge of desperation she couldn't hide. Eventually, she was passed over for a promotion she had been certain was hers. And while all this was happening, I was quietly reclaiming my dignity. I wasn't living extravagantly, but I was living on my own terms. My new apartment was small but bright, filled with things I had chosen because they brought me peace. I started attending community groups, even signing up for a painting class I had once put off when motherhood consumed my time. Every day felt like stitching a new quilt, careful, patient, but undeniably mine. The contrast between us grew sharper. She, once so confident, now scrambling to hold together the pieces of an image built on entitlement. Me, once discarded, now standing taller than I had in years. The twist that satisfied me most was this, the very future she had counted on the inheritance. The unspoken assumption that my life's work would funnel into hers was gone. She had written me out of her wedding, but I had written her out of my legacy. And the beauty of it was that she didn't realize the full extent until it was too late. There was no need for confrontation. The consequences were unfolding in ways louder than any words I could have spoken. She had lost not only the financial advantage she thought she controlled, but also the one thing she never expected to lose: my trust, my respect, and my place in her story. And as her world shrank, mine expanded. For the first time in decades, I was no longer living in her shadow. I was stepping fully into my own light. These days, my life feels quieter, but in the best way possible. The silence that once felt heavy and suffocating has become comforting. Like a soft blanket I can wrap around myself. My mornings begin with sunlight streaming into a space that is entirely my own. I brew coffee in a kitchen I decorated myself, with colors that make me smile. It's not grand or extravagant, but every piece in it was chosen because it reflects who I am, not who I was expected to be. I found joy in small routines. I joined a local art class, something I had always put off when my life was consumed by responsibility. At first, my hands were clumsy with the brush, but over time, the colors began to flow. Each painting feels like reclaiming a piece of myself I had forgotten. I've made friends there too, women who have lived through their own storms and found new ways to begin again. We laugh, we share, and we remind each other that starting over isn't just possible, it can be beautiful. I also volunteer once a week at a community center. I sit with younger mothers, some exhausted and overwhelmed, and I share what I know. I see in their eyes the same determination I once carried, and I tell them gently that love and respect are the greatest gifts they can give their children. Not money, not appearances, but love that makes someone feel safe. It comforts me to know that my story, as painful as it was, might help someone else avoid the same heartbreak. When I think of family now, I no longer tie it only to blood. Family is about who shows up for you, who honors you when you're vulnerable, who treats you with kindness even when the world doesn't. Sometimes those people carry your last name, and sometimes they don't. And that's all right. I've learned that respect is not something you can demand. It's something that must be freely given. And if it isn't, then maybe that person was never truly on your side to begin with. My daughter may have chosen distance, but I have chosen peace. She may have lost sight of love, but I've rediscovered mine in myself, in my community, and in the life I am still building. If you've listened this far, maybe you've lived through something similar. Maybe you know what it feels like to be overlooked, dismissed, or betrayed by someone you trusted most. I want you to know this. You are not defined by the people who fail to see your worth. You are defined by the courage you find to stand tall anyway. Thank you for listening to my story. If it touched your heart, please share it with someone who might need the reminder that they're not alone. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment below. Tell me your story, because your voice matters and someone out there needs to hear it.